The morning sun rose pink and soft over Nu. It was not the same sun that warmed Earth, but after 3 generations, the colonists had learned to love it just the same. The light touched the rice paddies first, then crawled slowly across the small houses with their curved roofs, built to remind the people of a home most of them had never seen. Ho walked between the rows of rice, his boots sinking slightly into the wet soil. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and hands that had once commanded warships. Now those hands pulled weeds and checked water levels. He preferred it this way. War was for young people. Farming was for those who wanted to remember why peace mattered. His daughter had laughed at him when he first bought the farm. She was the colony administrator, busy with reports and meetings and the endless small problems of keeping 2 million people fed and happy. But she visited him every Sunday, and they would sit on his porch and drink tea and watch the sun set behind the western mountains. Today was not Sunday. Today was an ordinary Tuesday, and Ho had work to do. 3 kilometers above him, in the orbital station that watched over Nu, a young man named was eating his breakfast. He was 24 years old, fresh from the academy, and he had been assigned to this quiet posting because nothing ever happened here. Nu was far from any conflict, far from any threat. It was, his instructors had told him, the perfect place to learn patience. Was learning patience. He was also learning that space was very boring. He finished his rice and kimchi and walked to his station. The screens showed the usual nothing: empty space, distant stars, the gentle curve of the planet below, blue and green and beautiful. Then the screens showed something else. Blinked, he leaned forward. He checked his instruments twice, then 3 times. His training told him to stay calm. His heart did not listen. 17 ships had just appeared at the edge of the system. They were big, they were fast, and they were heading directly toward Nu. He opened a channel to the colony below. His voice was steady, even though his hands were shaking. He had been trained for this. He had never expected to use that training. The colony administrator answered. It was Park, and her voice was warm and tired. She had been working late again. Told her what he saw. The warmth left her voice immediately. She asked if he had tried to contact the ships. He had. They did not respond. She asked if he could identify them. He could not. The ship designs matched nothing in the human database. They were alien. They were unknown, and they were 12 minutes away. Told him to keep trying to make contact. She told him to send a distress signal to Earth. She told him to stay calm. Then the line went dead. Looked at his screens. The 17 ships had opened fire on the station. Not warning shots, not disabling shots. They simply fired everything they had. He had 6 seconds to live. He used 5 of them to send a message to Earth. Just coordinates, ship count, and 2 words that came from somewhere deep in his gut, somewhere that understood what was happening even before his brain caught up. The message was simple: they're hunting. Then ceased to exist. On the surface below, Ho looked up. The sky was wrong. There were lights where there should be no lights, streaks of fire cutting through the pink morning clouds. He stood very still, his hands frozen around a bundle of weeds, and watched the orbital station die. He had seen ships destroyed before. He had commanded the destruction of ships. But that was war, and war had rules, and even in war you gave the enemy a chance to surrender. The aliens gave no chance. They asked for nothing, they said nothing, they simply killed. The first bombardment hit the capital city. Ho saw the flash before he heard the sound, a white light so bright it burned shadows into the ground. The sound came after, a roar that shook the earth and knocked him to his knees. He got up and ran. Not toward the city. He knew there was nothing left of the city. He ran toward the water reservoir, the deep underground chamber where the colony stored its emergency supplies. It was the only place he could think of. It was probably useless, but Ho had not survived 3 wars by giving up. Behind him, the world ended. The aliens were thorough. They bombed the cities first, then the towns, then the villages. They bombed the farms and the forests and the empty fields where nothing lived but grass and insects. They bombed until there was nothing left to bomb. It took 6 hours. 2.3 million people lived on Nu when the morning began. By afternoon, the number was much smaller. By evening, the planet was silent. Ho sat in the darkness of the reservoir and listened to the silence. He could hear his own breathing, his own heartbeat, and nothing else. The walls around him were thick enough to block the radiation, thick enough to muffle the sounds of destruction. He did not know if anyone else had made it to shelter. He did not know if there were any other shelters left. He thought about his daughter, had been in the capital, had been in her office, probably on the phone with the orbital station, probably trying to organize an evacuation that would never happen. Was dead. He knew this. He felt it in his chest, a cold weight that would never leave. His daughter was dead and he was alive, and there was nothing fair about it. 3 weeks passed. Ho survived on emergency rations and recycled water. He did not go outside. The radiation levels were too high. He waited because waiting was all he could do. On the 22nd day, he heard something, a sound from above, engines. Human engines with the familiar whine of Earth fleet thrusters. He climbed out of the reservoir and stood in the ruins of his world. The sky was gray with ash. The ground was black and cracked. Nothing grew, nothing moved, nothing lived. Except him. The rescue shuttle landed 100 meters away. The soldiers who came out wore radiation suits and carried weapons. They scanned him, checked him for injuries, and asked him questions he could barely understand. One of them was a young woman with kind eyes. She told him they had received a distress signal 3 weeks ago. She told him they had come as fast as they could. She told him she was sorry. Ho looked at her. His eyes were empty. His voice was flat. He asked her one question. Did anyone else survive? The young woman looked away. She did not answer. She did not need to. They took him aboard the shuttle. They wrapped him in a blanket and gave him hot tea and spoke to him in soft voices. They recorded his testimony. They documented everything he remembered. The last thing Ho said before they put him in the medical bay was not about the attack. It was not about the aliens or the bombardment or the 6 hours of death. It was about his daughter. She liked to sing, he said. When she was little, she would sing while she helped me in the garden. She had a beautiful voice. Then Ho closed his eyes and said nothing more. The shuttle rose through the gray sky and left Nu behind. Below, the planet turned slowly in the darkness, a tomb for 2.3 million people who had done nothing wrong. The aliens had already moved on. They did not look back. They did not care. To them, Nu was just another world, just another harvest, just another step in an endless march of destruction. They did not know that somewhere in the void, a message was traveling toward Earth, a message from a dead man, a message that would change everything. They're hunting. Earth received the message, Earth understood, and Earth began to plan. The United Terran Assembly Chamber was the largest room on Earth. It sat deep beneath the Sol megalopolis, protected by 3 kilometers of rock and steel, built to survive anything the universe could throw at it. 2,000 representatives from every nation and colony sat in curved rows that rose toward a domed ceiling painted with stars. Today, the chamber was silent. President stood at the central podium, his hands flat on the wooden surface. He was a tall man with a thin face and tired eyes. He had been president for 6 years, and in that time he had dealt with economic crises, territorial disputes, and the endless small problems of governing 12 billion people. He had never dealt with anything like this. The screens behind him showed images from Nu, before and after. The before showed green fields and blue oceans and cities full of light. The after showed nothing. Gray ash and black craters and silence. 2.3 million people, gone in 6 hours. The representatives had seen these images already. They had seen them 100 times in the 3 days since the news arrived. But they watched again, because looking away felt like betrayal. Admiral sat in the military section, her uniform crisp and her face carved from stone. She was 51 years old, commander of Earth's Third Fleet, and she had not slept since the message arrived. Her eyes were fixed on the screens, but her mind was elsewhere. Her mind was calculating distances, ship counts, fuel requirements, and 1,000 other details that would matter very soon. Dr. Shin sat beside the Admiral, a tablet in her hands and data scrolling across her glasses. She was the head of strategic intelligence, and she knew things about the galaxy that most humans would never learn. She knew about the species that had risen and fallen. She knew about the empires that had burned across the stars. And she knew about The president cleared his throat. The chamber fell even more silent. He spoke slowly, carefully, choosing each word like a man walking through a minefield. He told them what they already knew. An unknown alien fleet had attacked New without warning. No communication, no demands, no survivors except one old man who had hidden underground. Then he told them what Dr. Shin had discovered. The aliens were called the Dominion. They had existed for thousands of years. They had encountered 17 intelligent species during that time. They had destroyed all 17, not conquered, not enslaved, destroyed, every planet, every colony, every ship, every living being. They did not want territory. They did not want resources. They did not want slaves or tribute or submission. They wanted nothing except the death of everything that was not them. A murmur ran through the chamber. Fear, anger, disbelief. The representatives looked at each other, looked at the screens, looked at their own shaking hands. The president raised his hand for silence. He had one more thing to say. They did not know where Earth was. New had been a remote colony, far from human space, and the communication logs had been destroyed with the orbital station. But they would keep expanding. They would keep hunting. And eventually, probably within a decade, they would find humanity's home. The question was simple: what should humanity do? Admiral stood. She did not ask permission. She did not wait to be recognized. She simply stood, and everyone turned to look at her. Her voice was calm and cold. She said that she had studied the data. She had analyzed their tactics, their technology, their patterns of behavior. She had found something interesting. They never faced retaliation. In 17 encounters with intelligent species, not one had ever struck back. Some tried to flee. Some tried to negotiate. Some tried to hide. All of them died. They believed they were invincible. They believed the universe was full of prey, not predators. They had never met anything that could hurt them. Admiral paused. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of presidents and generals and representatives from 100 different nations. Then she asked a question. They sent no warning. They offered no terms. They killed children in their schools and farmers in their fields and old men drinking tea with their daughters. Why should we give them what they never gave us? The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted at each other, at the admiral, at the president. Some demanded immediate attack. Others demanded diplomacy. Others demanded more information, more time, more anything except making a decision. Dr. Shin stood and raised her hand. The room slowly quieted. She spoke softly, but her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. She said that she had prepared 2 plans. The first was diplomatic. They would send envoys to They would try to negotiate, to explain, to find common ground. She estimated a 97% chance of failure. They had never responded to diplomatic contact. They did not see other species as beings worthy of conversation. The second plan was military. They would not send warnings. They would not make demands. They would find and they would do to exactly what they had done to 17 other species. She called it the doctrine of proportional silence. Another eruption of noise. The representatives could not agree on anything. Some called the second plan genocide, others called it justice, others called it survival. President let them argue for an hour. Then he called for a vote. The vote was not close, it was unanimous. No declaration of war would be broadcast. No ultimatum would be delivered. Humanity would respond to silence with silence. They had written the rules of this game. Humanity would simply play by them. The chamber emptied slowly. Representatives walked out in small groups, speaking in low voices, their faces pale. They had just voted for the death of billions. They had just become something they had never wanted to be. Admiral remained at her seat. Dr. Shin sat beside her. They did not speak for a long time. Finally, asked if they were doing the right thing. Shin did not answer. She did not know. The next day, Ho was brought before the assembly. He stood at the central podium where the president had stood, wrapped in a simple gray coat, his face thin and his eyes empty. The representatives looked at him. This old man was all that remained of 2.3 million people. This old man was the only witness to the murder of a world. President asked him one question. "What do you want?" Ho was silent for a long moment. He looked at the screens, still showing the images of new. He looked at the representatives, sitting in their comfortable chairs in their protected chamber. He looked at his own hands, still stained with the soil of a farm that no longer existed. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it filled the chamber. He said that he wanted them to understand what silence meant. He said that his daughter had died without knowing why. She had died without hearing a single word from the beings who killed her. She had died in confusion and fear and pain, and her killers had not even cared enough to tell her why. He said that they deserved the same. They deserved to die without understanding. They deserved to die in silence. Then Ho turned and walked out of the chamber. The representatives watched him go. No one spoke. No one moved. Admiral looked at Dr. Shin. Something had changed in her eyes. The coldness was still there, but now there was something else. Something that might have been resolve, or might have been sorrow, or might have been both. She stood and walked out after Ho. She had work to do. In the shipyards orbiting Mars, the first orders were already arriving. New designs, new weapons, new ships built for a single purpose. The galaxy was about to learn something it had never known before. Humanity could be silent too. And when humanity was silent, the universe should be afraid. 18 months passed. In the shipyards of Mars and Europa and Titan, something was being built. Thousands of workers labored in shifts that never ended, constructing ships unlike anything humanity had made before. The designs came from Dr. Shin's intelligence division, refined by engineers who had spent their careers preparing for a war they hoped would never come. The ships were called Ghosts. Captain Lee stood on the bridge of the Rose of Sharon and watched her crew work. She was 40 years old, with short black hair and a scar across her left cheek from a training accident 15 years ago. She had commanded destroyers and cruisers and patrol ships. She had never commanded anything like this. There was a stealth carrier. It was 2 kilometers long, painted in a black so deep it seemed to swallow light. Its engines produced no heat signature. Its hull absorbed all electromagnetic radiation. When they moved through space, it was invisible, a ghost. 340 ships like this one were being built. 340 ghosts, each carrying fighters and bombers and weapons designed for a single purpose. Lieutenant sat at the tactical station, her fingers moving across the controls with the speed of someone who had spent months practicing. She was 26 years old, the youngest tactical officer in the fleet. She had been chosen for this mission because she was brilliant and because she had no family. No one would mourn her if she died. She tried not to think about that. Chief Engineer O walked the corridors of the everyday checking systems, running diagnostics, looking for problems that might kill them all. He was 55 years old, with gray hair and thick hands and a face that rarely smiled. His brother had lived on new. His brother had been a teacher at a small school in the capital. His brother had loved poetry and bad jokes and cooking meals that were always slightly burned. His brother was dead now, along with 2.3 million others. Worked 16 hours a day, sometimes 18, sometimes 20. He ate when he remembered to eat. He slept when his body refused to stay awake any longer. The other crew members worried about him, but no one told him to slow down. Everyone on this ship had lost someone. Everyone understood. One night, a young engineer found him working alone in the engine room. She asked him why he pushed himself so hard. Looked at her with tired eyes. "My brother liked to sing," he said. "When we were children, he would sing me to sleep. He had a beautiful voice. They took his voice, so I will take theirs." The young engineer did not ask any more questions. 6 months into the construction, Captain Lee received new orders. That was complete enough for a reconnaissance mission. They were to travel to space, observe the enemy, and return with information. They were not to engage, they were not to be seen. They were ghosts, and ghosts did not fight. Ghosts watched and waited and reported. The journey took 3 months. They traveled through hyperspace, emerging far from any star, then drifting slowly toward the core systems. They moved at minimal power, their engines barely whispering, their presence hidden from every sensor in the galaxy. Lieutenant spent the journey studying ship designs. She memorized their weapons, their defenses, their tactical patterns. She ran simulations of battles that had not happened yet, learning how to kill an enemy she had never met. When they finally reached she understood why the simulations had seemed too easy. They had no defenses. There was beautiful in a harsh and angular way. Great cities of black stone rose from red deserts. Ships moved through the orbital lanes without formation, without escort, without any awareness that danger might exist. They had never been attacked. They did not know how to be afraid. Captain Lee ordered the ship to hold position behind a small moon. From there, they watched. What they saw changed everything. The capital city had a plaza at its center. In that plaza stood monuments. 17 monuments, each one made from the bones and skulls of a different species. 17 species that had lived and dreamed and built civilizations. 17 species that were now nothing but trophies. Lieutenant stared at the images on her screen. Her hands were shaking. "They're proud of it," she said. "They killed billions of people and they're proud of it." Captain Lee said nothing. She had expected cruelty. She had expected evil. She had not expected this casual celebration of genocide. Chief Engineer stood at the back of the bridge, his arms crossed, his face hard as stone. He looked at the monuments and thought about his brother. He thought about the school where his brother had taught, now ash and glass. He thought about the children who had learned to read in that school, now bones buried under a gray sky. They would build no monument for new. They had not bothered to learn humanity's name. That was fine. Humanity would teach them. They spent 2 weeks observing. They mapped the systems. They counted ships and stations and population centers. They recorded everything they saw. 3 core worlds, 14 major orbital stations, population approximately 8.7 billion. It was a vast empire. It was an ancient empire. It was an empire that had never known defeat. Soon it would know nothing else. The journey home took another 3 months. Captain Lee spent the time writing her report. She described the defenses, which were minimal. She described their patrol patterns, which were lazy. She described their arrogance, which was absolute. She concluded with a single recommendation: strike now, strike hard, strike in silence. When the return to Earth space Admiral was waiting, she read Captain Lee's report in 1 hour. She asked 3 questions. She made her decision. The fleet would launch in 6 months. The final phase of preparation began. Ships were completed. Weapons were tested. Crews were trained. Everything was done in secret, in silence, in the shadows where they could not see. Ho visited the shipyards once. He was not a soldier anymore, but the admiral had given him special permission. He walked through the corridors of the and looked at the weapons that would avenge his daughter. Chief Engineer found him standing in the observation deck, staring at the stars. They talked for a long time. They talked about the people they had lost. They talked about the world they had loved. They talked about what they were about to do. At the end, Ho asked if he was ready. Looked at the stars, the same stars his brother had watched from new. "I have been ready," he said, "since the day they took everything from me." Ho nodded. He understood. They all understood. 6 months later, the Ghost Armada launched. 340 ships slipped out of Earth's space, one by one, vanishing into the darkness between stars. No broadcasts, no announcements, no declarations, just shadows moving through the void, heading toward an enemy that did not know they were coming. They continued their hunts. They destroyed 2 more colonies belonging to other species. They added more skulls to their monuments. They laughed and celebrated and never once looked over their shoulders. They should have looked. The ghosts were coming. And ghosts did not forgive. They called there the Eternal Throne. It was a name that spoke of permanence, of power that would never end. For 6,000 years the name had been true. Today the name became a lie. High Sovereign stood in his palace and watched the morning sun rise over the capital. He was ancient by standards. His scales faded to a pale gray, his eyes still sharp with the cruelty that had kept him alive for 3 centuries. He had ordered the deaths of billions. He had watched species burn and felt nothing but satisfaction. This morning he felt something different, something he did not recognize. It was fear. The first report came from the outer defense station, a flash of light, then silence. The station simply stopped transmitting. Its advisors assumed it was a technical failure. These things happened. The second report came from the military shipyard orbiting the third moon. Another flash, another silence. This time, optical telescopes caught an image before the cameras died. The shipyard was there, and then it was not. A cloud of debris where 100 warships had been under construction. Demanded answers. His admirals had none. The third report came from the communication hub that linked the core systems to their colonies. The hub was the most heavily shielded installation in the Empire, buried deep inside an asteroid. It was designed to survive anything. It did not survive. In the span of 30 minutes, the Dominion went blind. They could not talk to their colonies. They could not coordinate their fleets. They could not even communicate between their own core worlds. And still, they could not see their enemy. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Silent Answer and watched the scramble. Her fleet had emerged from hyperspace 2 hours ago, 340 ships spreading out in a pattern designed for maximum coverage. They had fired their opening shots from positions so far away that the light would take minutes to reach eyes. By the time they saw the weapons coming, the weapons had already arrived. The ghost ships were not kind. They were not merciful. They were not interested in military targets alone. They struck everything. Power stations, water processing plants, food distribution centers, transportation hubs, everything that kept a civilization alive. Lieutenant sat at her station her fingers dancing across the tactical controls. She had trained for this moment for 18 months. She had run thousands of simulations. She had memorized every target, every approach vector, every weakness in infrastructure. Now she was killing billions of people, and she felt nothing except the cold satisfaction of a job well done. She tried not to think about what that meant. Chief Engineer stood at his station, monitoring the ship's systems. Every few minutes he would look up at the main screen, watching the cities burn. He thought about his brother. He thought about the school. He thought about the children who had never grown up. "This is for you," he whispered. "This is all for you." High Sovereign stood in his palace and watched his empire die. His advisors screamed at each other, blaming failures and incompetence and bad luck. His generals demanded ships, demanded weapons, demanded something to fight back against an enemy they could not see. Said nothing. He understood now what was happening. Someone had come for them. Someone had done to them what they had done to so many others. He should have expected this. He should have prepared for this. He had not, because he had never believed it was possible. There were the hunters, there were the strong. The universe was full of prey, not predators. He had been wrong. The bombardment continued for hours. The ghost fleet moved through space like shadows, appearing only long enough to fire before vanishing again. Warships scrambled to intercept, but they could not find targets. They fired at empty space. They chased sensor ghosts. They died without ever seeing the enemy that killed them. By the end of the first day, the military was broken. Their fleet was scattered debris. Their orbital stations were ruins. Their communication network was gone. On the second day, the bombardment reached the surface. Ho stood on the observation deck of the Silent Answer. Admiral had allowed him to join the fleet as a civilian advisor. He had no official duties. He was there to watch. He was there to witness. He watched the cities burn. He watched the monuments in the Capitol Plaza collapse, the skulls of 17 species tumbling into the dust. He watched the eternal throne become a graveyard. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, no joy, just a cold emptiness where his heart used to be. On the third day, High Sovereign finally managed to send a message to the human fleet. His technicians had worked through the night, building a transmitter from salvaged parts. The message was simple, one word: surrender. Admiral received the message. She read it once. She deleted it without response. The bombardment continued. Sent another message, then another. He offered peace. He offered tribute. He offered anything, everything, if only the killing would stop. The human fleet did not respond. On the morning of the fourth day, advisors found a way to broadcast directly to the human flagship. The channel opened, and for the first time, human and looked at each other. Saw Admiral's face on his screen. She was calm, cold. Her eyes showed nothing. He asked her why. Why were they doing this? What did they want? What would make them stop? Did not answer. She simply stepped aside, and another face appeared on the screen. Ho looked at the High Sovereign of the Dominion. He looked at the being who had ordered the death of his daughter, his world, his people. He spoke quietly, but his words carried across the void. You killed 2.3 million people who never knew your name. They were eating breakfast. They were teaching children. They were falling in love. My daughter was drinking tea with me the morning before you came. She liked to sing. He paused. His eyes were empty, but his voice did not waver. You gave them no warning. You offered no mercy. Now you understand what that feels like. Opened his mouth to respond, to plead, to bargain. Ho cut the transmission. The bombardment resumed. It took 72 hours to kill a civilization, 3 days to erase 6,000 years of history, 3 days to destroy 8.7 billion lives. The Ghost Fleet was thorough. They did not leave survivors. They did not leave witnesses. They did not leave anything except silence and ashes. When it was done, Admiral ordered the fleet to withdraw. They left the same way they had come, in silence, in shadow, in darkness. Behind them, the eternal throne burned. The Dominion was gone. Lieutenant sat at her station and stared at the empty screens. She had killed more people in 3 days than any human in history. She had helped erase an entire species from existence. She should feel something. She knew she should feel something. But there was only silence. Chief Engineer walked through the corridors of the ship was quiet now, the weapons cold, the mission complete. He thought about his brother. He thought about the song his brother used to sing. They will never take anyone's voice again, he said to no one. It was not comfort, it was not victory, it was just a fact. And facts in the end were all that remained. 1 year passed. The galaxy changed. Not slowly the way galaxies usually changed, but suddenly, violently, like a bone breaking. One day the Dominion existed, an empire that had burned across the stars for 6,000 years. The next day it was gone, ash and silence and memory. The other species noticed. There were 14 intelligent civilizations in the known galaxy, not counting the 17 that had destroyed. These 14 had lived in fear for as long as their histories stretched back. They had watched the hunt. They had sent prayers and offerings and desperate pleas. They had never found safety. Now the hunters were dead, and a new species stood in their place. Humanity. The 14 called them many names: the destroyers, the silent ones, the species that killed gods. None of these names were compliments, all of them were true. Ambassador Nam stood before the Galactic Conquered and looked at the representatives of 14 civilizations. She was 43 years old, with gray in her hair and steel in her eyes. She had been a diplomat for 20 years. She had never given a speech like this one. The chamber was vast, built to accommodate species of every size and shape. Some of the representatives were smaller than her hand. Some were larger than buildings. All of them watched her with expressions she could not read. She did not apologize. She stood at the podium and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the chamber. She told them about new. She told them about 2.3 million people who had lived ordinary lives on an ordinary morning. She told them about a young man named, who had used his last 6 seconds to send a warning. She told them about Ho, who had lost his daughter and his world and everything except his pain. She told them about the decision humanity had made, not to negotiate, not to plead, not to send warnings or demands or ultimatums, just to respond in kind. Some of the representatives shifted in their seats. Some made sounds that might have been discomfort or fear or approval, could not tell. She continued, "We do not seek war. We do not desire conquest. We came to the stars looking for friends, for partners, for other minds to share the universe with. We found thee instead." She paused, letting the words settle. "Understand this. We remember our dead, every single one. We carved their names into stone and we carry them with us wherever we go, and we do not forgive those who murder them without cause." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings she had never seen before. "We are not your enemy. We do not want to be your enemy. But if you come for us the way they did, if you attack our homes and kill our children and offer us no warning and no mercy, then we will respond the same way we responded to them." Silence. The representatives stared at her. She could feel their fear. It was thick in the air, heavy as gravity. Good, she thought. Let them be afraid. Fear was better than the alternative. She finished her speech with 3 words. "We remember everything." Then she turned and walked out of the chamber. The galaxy began to call humanity the Silent Ones. It was not a name of respect. It was a name of terror. But it worked. In the years since the campaign, not a single human colony had been threatened. Not a single human ship had been attacked. Fear was an ugly thing, but it was effective. On Earth, the celebrations had faded quickly. There were parades at first, speeches and medals and monuments to the soldiers who had saved humanity. But the joy did not last. How could it? They had killed 8.7 billion people. They had erased a civilization. They had become something they had never wanted to be. Admiral retired. She did not give speeches or accept medals. She simply walked away from the fleet that had followed her into the darkness, and she disappeared into a small house on the coast of the Korean peninsula. She lived alone. She gardened. She watched the ocean and thought about the things she had done. Ho came to visit her once. He found her in her garden, pulling weeds with the same precision she had used to plan the destruction of empires. She looked older than she had a year ago. Tired. The steel was still in her eyes, but something else was there too, something that might have been doubt. They sat on her porch and watched the sunset. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Ho asked the question he had carried for a year. Was it worth it? Did not answer immediately. She looked at the ocean, at the red and gold light spreading across the water. They will never do it again, she said at last. To anyone, that has to be worth something. Ho nodded slowly. He understood what she meant. They had killed 17 species. They would have killed more. They would have killed humanity eventually. Now they would kill no one. But the answer did not satisfy him. It could not satisfy him. I do not know if we'd be proud of what we did, he said. Looked at him. Her eyes were tired but honest. Neither do I, she said, but she would be alive if they had given us a choice. They did not, so we did not either. Ho said nothing. There was nothing to say. He left the next morning. He did not see Admiral again. The memorial stood in Seoul in a park that had once been a palace. It was a simple thing, a wall of black stone, polished to a mirror shine. On that wall were carved 2.3 million names. Every person who had died on Nu, every farmer and teacher and child and dreamer. Ho came to the memorial on the anniversary of the attack. He found his daughter's name near the center of the wall. Park. The letters were small, just one name among millions. He stood there for a long time. He did not cry. He had not cried in a year. The tears had dried up somewhere between Nu and the. A young woman approached him. She was wearing a military uniform, but she moved like someone who had not worn it for long. She stood beside him and looked at the wall. I lost my brother, she said. He was on the orbital station. Ho looked at her. He remembered the name. The young communications officer who had sent the warning. The young man who had used his last breath to tell Earth they were hunting. Your brother saved us all, Ho said. The young woman shook her head. He saved some of us, she said. He could not save himself. They stood together in silence. Two survivors, two people who had lost everything and found nothing to replace it. After a while, the young woman asked Ho if he was okay. He thought about the question. He thought about his daughter, about the tea they had shared on that last morning. He thought about the bombardment, about the silence that followed. No, he said, I do not think I will ever be okay, but I am alive, and I remember. The young woman nodded. She understood. They parted ways. Ho walked out of the park, through the streets of Seoul, past millions of people living ordinary lives on an ordinary day. They did not know him. They did not know what he had lost or what he had seen. They simply lived because living was what people did. Above them, invisible in the daylight sky, the ghost fleet maintained its silent vigil. They were always watching now, always ready. They would never let another Nu happen. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity. Perhaps one day it would learn to respect them instead. Perhaps one day there would be peace, real peace, not just the absence of war. But that day was far away. For now there was only silence. Ho reached the edge of the city and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the void between worlds, the ashes of the Dominion drifted through space. Somewhere out there, new species were being born, new civilizations rising, new stories beginning. He wondered what those stories would say about humanity. He wondered if they would understand. Probably not. Understanding was too much to ask. But they would remember. Everyone remembered the silent ones. He turned and walked away, an old man with empty eyes and a heart full of names. Behind him the sun set over Seoul. The city lights came on, one by one pushing back the darkness. And in the silence between stars something watched, something waited, something that had learned too late that the void was not empty. It was patient. And when it struck, it did not speak.